that you're here. If you're watching online, we're glad that you're taking the time to hang out with us. If you're on fall break somewhere, we hope you enjoy your week. If you have your Bible or your phone, I want you to turn to Psalm 37. If you're using a paper copy like I am, it should be somewhere around the middle of your Bible. Psalm 37. Early last week, I took a little survey of about 15, 20 people, and I asked them this question. I said, name the top 3 places that you don't enjoy going, but you find yourself there on a pretty regular basis anyway. You may have never thought about that, but all of us have these places that we don't particularly enjoy going, but because of certain circumstances, we frequently find ourselves there. So the question was, name the top 3 places that fit that description for you. Now, thankfully, when I did this, nobody wrote back church, which would have made things, really awkward. But I did get some interesting responses. To set this up for you, the people I asked represented sort of a broad cross-section of life. There were young people who were single, there were people with kids, there were older people with grandkids. So I tried to get a pretty fair picture of the places that all of us don't like to go and yet find ourselves there. Anyway, what was interesting is even though you had all these people coming from different angles and approaching this question from different positions, everybody basically had the same responses. Let me share with you just some of these. One person responded that one of the places they hated to go was the gym. Now, some of you know what that is. Some of you have no idea what they're talking about. The gym is the place that you drive past on the way to Donut Palace, just in case you're wondering. A couple people mentioned how they hated going to gas stations. My favorite response, somebody said they hated to go to the county fair. Then, of course, you can imagine there were a lot of people who said they don't like to go to work. They don't like to go to their job, and yet they find themselves there on a daily basis. One really honest person wrote this. She said, kids' birthday parties. And then in parentheses, she included even my own kids' parties. And I would tell you who that was, but she swore me to secrecy, so for $5, I'll tell you. In the same vein, one person said any kind of family reunion or family event. Some of you probably already thought of that. And then that brings me to the top 3 places that people said they don't enjoy going, but they still find themselves there on a regular basis. Coming in at number 3 was the funeral home. Now, you can kind of relate to that. We know when you go to a funeral home, you're usually there to say goodbye to somebody that you love. So there's an aspect of it's a painful experience. So you can understand that, and yet all of us find ourselves there from time to time. Coming in at number 2 was the grocery store. And again, that makes a lot of sense. When I sent out the question, one person wrote back with the words grocery store in all caps 4 times, even though I only asked for 3. But that can be a frustrating experience, and yet we all go there. But even that wasn't number 1. According to my survey, the number 1 place that people do not like to go and yet still find themselves is the doctor's office, which also includes dentist in my book. Now, when I was making my list, that was not my number 1. And even though I personally like all of my doctors, and for me, it's not even the event of seeing the doctor that bothers me. It's the anxiety of waiting in the waiting room to see the doctor. I like my doctors. I trust my doctors, and I'm not complaining because, doctors are busy people. They've got a lot of people, vying for their attention. But for me, there's almost nothing worse than spending a prolonged amount of time hanging out in a waiting room. Because when you're in a waiting room, there's not much you can do. I mean, there's some magazines there that are left over from 2005 that you could read if you wanted to. Normally there's a TV, but it's always on HGTV, which if you're not interested in that, so you're just kind of stuck. Something I've been doing recently, hanging out in waiting rooms, you can start talking to the people around you, and you can get out your phone and get on WebMD and try to diagnose them before they go in. No, don't do that. Don't do that. You'll get arrested. But it is a thought. For me, the most frustrating thing about waiting rooms is that you feel like you're not making any progress. You haven't seen the doctor yet, so you don't really have a a plan to get better, and you don't want to go back, because if you go back without seeing the doctor, you're right back where you started. I mean, when you're in the waiting room, you're sort of stuck in this space between what has been and what eventually will be or could be. And I think that explains why so many of us don't enjoy going to the doctor's office. But you know that you have to. As much as we dislike them, the waiting rooms are unavoidable. For the last few weeks, we've been in this series we called the comeback, and the idea has been that as we go through life, all of us encounter these periods in which we need a comeback. There's been some sort of a setback, and now you're waiting to experience a comeback. And we've been talking about how you do that and what you should be doing. But as we finish up this series, I want us to talk about what you can do when you find yourself in the middle. What do you do when you feels like you're stuck between your setback and your comeback? Now, to help us understand this, Psalm 37, written by a guy named David. And as we jump into this, it's important for you to understand that David was a guy who lived an incredible life. As a teenager, this old prophet named Samuel had shown up and anointed him as the next king of Israel. Not long after that, David goes out and he kills this giant named Goliath with a sling and some stones. And then eventually he does become the king of Israel. In fact, he becomes Israel's greatest king. He's the guy that consolidates power and eventually brings the Ark of the Covenant back to Israel, which was a huge deal. But even though David was a guy that had some incredible highs and some incredible accomplishments, just like us, he experienced some incredible lows. There was a well-publicized affair, a conspiracy to commit murder, and then a dysfunctional family as a result of all that. And if you think your family's messed up, you go back and read David's story and you'll feel better about your family, because it's hard to imagine a family that was more dysfunctional than David's. So even though David had all of these incredible accomplishments, he also had his share of sleepless nights and anxiety-filled days. For David, there were several periods during his life when he felt stuck in this waiting room, this space between his setbacks and his comebacks. It's the same space that so many of us are living in even right now. So when you get to Psalm 37, David writes about some of the things he's learned during his time in this waiting room. And in many ways, Psalm 37 functions as the letter that David would have written a younger version of himself had that been possible. By this time, he's grown into an old man, and he's looking back over his life, and he's taking some of the things he's learned through all the ups and downs and all the twists and turns, and he writes them down after his long and eventful life. He summarizes for us some of the things he's learned. So if you have your Bible open, I want you to start with me in verse 25. Here's what he says. I was young, and now I'm old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread. They are always generous and lend freely. Their children will be a blessing. Now, you've heard the old saying that a wise man learns from experience. A better expression is that a wiser man learns from the experiences of others. And what you have in Psalm 37 is this incredible opportunity to learn from a guy that's already experienced all these different stages and then taking the time to distill down what he's learned into a few short verses. So since it was impossible for David to write a letter to a younger version of himself, he does the next best thing, and he writes a letter to those of us who are following along behind him. Now, the immediate context of Psalm 37 is this is David's reflection on what you should do when it feels like you're stuck. Now, keep in mind, David, just like us, grew up. He had all these dreams, all these things he hoped to accomplish. He accomplished a lot of them. But now he's an old man. He's looking back over his life. He's looking into the future. He doesn't have the time that he once had. And he's starting to realize that some of the things that he dreamed about, some of the things that he hoped to accomplish may go unfulfilled. You can probably relate to that. I mean, when you're a kid, all of us have these dreams of what we think our life's going to look like, right? You have this vision of what you could be and what you could accomplish, and usually it goes something like this. You're going to graduate from high school, you're going to go to this particular college, you're going to meet this person, you're going to fall in love, you're going to major in this, you're going to get out of college, you're going to get this job, you're going to make this salary, you're going to have this many kids, you're going to live in this big of a house, drive this kind of car, and live, happily ever after. But what tends to happen is that somewhere along the way of trying to live out your dreams, what happens? You get stuck somewhere. So you don't get accepted into that college, you flunk out of that program, the relationship you were counting on disintegrates, the kids don't come, you don't get the job you wanted, the salary you're making is a lot less than the salary you thought you would make, and the house you live in is a lot smaller than the house you thought you would live in, and you know how it goes. We've all been there. We find ourselves stuck in a place that we don't particularly enjoy being, and yet we find ourselves there anyway. And sometimes we discover that God's plan for our life is a lot different than our plans for our life. So what do you do when you find yourself sitting in what feels like the waiting room? You don't want to go back to where you started from, and you haven't quite made it to where you want to be, so what do? As the great theologian and band leader Tom Petty said, the waiting is the hardest part. And now you know where all the sinners are sitting, because they got that. There are 4 things that you see in this psalm. Here's the first one. You're waiting for a comeback. Avoid comparison. Check out what David writes in Psalm 37, verse 1. Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither, like the green plants, they will soon die away. So here's David, this incredible king. He's got all these accomplishments. He's got everything that he could ever want right at the tips of his fingers, and yet he sometimes falls into the trap that all of us sometimes fall into, and that's the trap of comparing ourselves to others. Now, if that's something that you struggle with, then you know, and H talked about this earlier, it's something that's easier today to do than it's ever been before because of social media. I recently read an article by a social science researcher. The title of the article, catch this, "The Unwatched Life is Not Worth Living." The unwatched life is not worth living. In the article, he talks about how in our culture, we've now conditioned ourselves to live our lives in the public eye. So for some people, and you know this is true, they think that everything they do on a day-to-day basis has to be snapped and posted and tweeted and put on Instagram, or else they've somehow fallen behind. And while social media might be a good way to stay connected with your friends, there's a downside to it, and it's this: it's never been easier in history for us to compare ourselves to the people around us. In many ways, a lot of people are now living their life as if, their life was a movie and they're the star of the movie and it's all about them. And then they get caught up watching somebody else's movie and they think if that other person's movie is more interested in their movie, that they're somehow falling behind. So we see all the things that other people have going on and all the things that they're accomplishing, and we think they've got it better than we've got it, and we get all out of sorts. It's especially painful if you don't think they deserve it. So you get down here to verse 2, and he says, don't fret because of those who are evil. And that word fret literally means to be hit or to be kindled. I think that's a pretty good description of what happens when we start comparing ourselves to the people around us. You see somebody who drives a better car than you, they have a better job than you, they live in a bigger house or a better house, they've got a better looking, more loving family, they drive a nicer car, and all of a sudden you start to fret. You start to become envious of what they have. Now the truth is, they may not have those things either. It may all be carefully staged and carefully edited for your viewing pleasure, but as long as you think they have it, it bothers you. One writer said it like this: we now live in what could be called the land of Ur. It's not enough to be rich. We want to be richer than the people around us. Not enough to have a nice car. We want our car to be nicer and newer. It's not enough to live in a big house. We want our house to be bigger. Not enough to be rich. We want to be richer and thinner and prettier and smarter, and on it goes. And it's not enough to be any of those things, because eventually what happens is you move from the land of Ur to the land of Ist. Now it's not enough that I'm richer. I want to be the richest. And it's not enough that my house is bigger. I want it to be the biggest. I want my car to be the newest. And we do the same thing to our kids. We want our kids to be the smartest and the most athletic and, have the best grades, and on and on and on it goes. And if you see somebody that you think is doing better than you're doing, you start to fret. You start to become envious. So how do you guard against it? Well, you just don't play the game. You refuse to do it. 2 Corinthians 10, the Apostle Paul says it like this. He says, we do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. He's talking about everybody in our culture who commends themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise. Why is it unwise to compare? David answers that question. He says it's unwise to compare because everything we compare is temporary. Now, over the last few weeks, we were talking this morning. Many of us have been shocked about how dry it's been. We know that hopefully there's some rain coming today, but if you've been paying attention, it hasn't rained. So day by day by day, you can watch your yard literally just burn up. It's withering away. It's dying right in front of us. And David says that's exactly what's going to happen to so many of the things that we fret about as we go through life. The house is going to fall in. The car's going to rush through. The money's going to run out. Your body's going to break down. Your job will one day be eliminated. And on and on and on it goes. So whatever you do, while you're waiting, while you're stuck in this space between, don't play that game. Don't play the comparison game because you can't win. Here's the second thing you do while you're waiting for a comeback. You do good. Check out what he says in verse 3. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. So what should you do when you find yourself stuck in the waiting room? What should you do when you're not sure what you should be doing? David answers the question with one line. He says, trust in the Lord and do good. Now that's a different approach than the approach that a lot of people take. A lot of people think to themselves, hey, since I don't know what to do, and since I'm unsure what my next step would be, I'll just sit back and do nothing. That's the approach a lot of people take. So rather than being proactive and looking for opportunities to serve, a lot of people are content to take the passive approach. So they sit back and it's like they're waiting for God to give them a clear direction as to what to do while God is waiting for them to get up and do anything, to do something. The way David says this is so perfect. Second part of verse 3 says, trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. I want you to underline that phrase, dwell in the land. That's David's way of saying that while you're waiting, you should be looking for good that you can do right now, right where you are. Not where you wish you were, not where you hope to be, not where you might eventually be, and not where you thought you would be, but right where you are now. You can only dwell in the land where you are now. The mistake that a lot of us make is that we spend an inordinate amount of time waiting for a clear calling from God while God is waiting for us to seize a clear opportunity. See, one of the things you see when you read the Bible is that whenever God called somebody to do something, they rarely got what all of us ask for. When you pray and you ask God for direction, here's what we do. We say, Lord, show me what you want me to do. And by that, we mean show me exactly what you want me to do. Give me the next 5 steps. Fill in all the details, show me exactly how it's going to turn out and where I'm going to wind up, and then I'll follow you. We want the 2-year plan and the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan, and rarely does it work that way. You go back and read the Bible, whenever God called somebody to do something, he usually showed up and he said, hey, follow me. Where are we going? Follow me. Well, what are we going to do when we get there? Follow me. How's it all going to turn out? Follow me. And as in the process of following him and growing closer to him, the picture began to clear up, and these people wound up in the spot where God wanted them to be. So if you're a person that's been waiting for God to reveal to you or to give you a vision of what he wants you to do next, I can tell you at least part of what he wants you to do next, and it's this. He wants you to do good right where you are now. He wants you to look for needs in your church and do what you can. He wants you to see things in your neighborhood. Do what you can to help them. He wants you to go to your job and your school and look around and see what you can do to help other people and do those things now. Not tomorrow, not in the future, but now. I love the way John Wesley said this. You should write this down. He said, do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Now, can you imagine if everybody just did that? if that was our attitude. Instead of struggling to find volunteers, we'd have to start new stuff just to give everybody an opportunity to serve. Instead of community organizations that are trying to make a difference dying because of lack of participation, we'd be able to rewrite the future of our entire community. Instead of schools trying to find creative ways to do more with less, we could change the trajectory of an entire generation of kids if we all just did the best we could with what we have right now. So a lot of people are so worried about tomorrow that we literally miss the opportunities of today. So while you're waiting for whatever it is that's going to come next, make sure that you're finding ways to do good now. Here's the third thing. While you're waiting for your comeback, make sure that you stay committed. Check out verse 5 of Psalm 37. David writes, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun." Now, I hope that for your sake, you don't have to hang out in waiting rooms very often, but because of what I do, I'm there quite a bit. And over the years, I've noticed there's this progression that I tend to go through, and maybe you can relate to this. There's this progression. You start waiting, and you're not sure, how long it's going to be. So it sort of starts with distraction. You're waiting to be seen, so you got your phone, so you get on social media and you compare yourself to everybody else, and then you get tired of that, so maybe you catch up on email, and then once you're done with that, there's sometimes, a TV you can watch, but usually on mute, so that doesn't do you much good, and then you're just kind of sitting there. So if you want to, you can pick up one of those old magazines and read an article, or you can do what I sometimes do and just watch the people around you. And I'll be honest, I've seen some interesting things in waiting rooms. I bet you have too. But what tends to happen though, if you sit there long enough, the distraction eventually turns to frustration. So you've been there a while and you start checking your watch and see how long it's going to be, and then you start to notice, how many people are in front of me, and this person came in after me and they got called back, and that's not fair, and you get kind of upset. Maybe you go to the desk and you ask them how long it's going to be. And for me, maybe it's true for you, the longer you sit there, the more frustrated you get. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody that's really frustrated, and they'll get up and leave, right? And it never fails. Like, as soon as they get up and walk out the front door, the nurse comes in the back door and hollers their name, and it's too late because they're gone, and they've missed their opportunity. It's always the way it works. But here's my point. The same thing that happens in doctor's offices happens in real life. You're waiting for your comeback. It feels like it's slow in coming, so you get distracted. And then you get frustrated. And then if you're not careful, you quit altogether. But the catch is that when you quit, you eliminate your chance to experience a comeback. That's why one of the keys to waiting for all this is to stay committed. Verse 5, David says, "Commit your way to the Lord." And the way it's written in Hebrew, this is active obedience. This is not just, I'm not sitting back and waiting for something to happen. I'm going to do everything I can in this moment to stay engaged with God on a daily basis. And the promise is that as I stay engaged with him, eventually he's going to shine a light on the path that he wants me to take. In the comeback book, Louis Giglio says this. He said, "God is less interested in handing us long-range, detailed plans." That's what we want. I mean, show me the picture. "And more interested in cultivating a personal, day-to-day relationship with us." Proverbs 3, Solomon says the same thing. It's our memory verse. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, and in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." So eventually, he's going to make the path clear. He's going to shine a light. He's going to show you where he wants you to go. But before you get to that moment, you have to submit to him. One more thing, and for many of us, this may be the hardest. You find yourself waiting for a comeback. It's important that you wait patiently. Check out verse 7. "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret," there's that word again, when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Again, it's this idea of refusing to play the comparison game. You're not going to sit there and get yourself all keyed up and all worried about and all stressed out because of what's happening to to somebody else. Instead, you're going to be still before the Lord, and you're going to wait patiently for what it is that comes next. But let's be honest, that's not easy. If you're like me, waiting patiently can be a challenge. We'll take you back in time. It was the beginning of 2010. I was 26 years old, and I was starting my 7th year working at a church in Nicholasville, Kentucky. I started out there as a youth minister, and eventually was moved into a position where I was overseeing some of the staff. I was working with college students and young adults and all the stuff that you do, and preaching quite a bit. So the plan was, they said, we want you to preach 15 or 20 times a year, oversee kind of the operations side, and then we'll give you the freedom to go other places on the weekend that you're not preaching. So it's a pretty good gig, really good situation. The problem, though, was that even though I was in a good situation, in a place that I liked a lot, I was starting to get antsy. You ever done that? I don't know how you define that word, but if you've experienced it, you know what it is. It wasn't that I was unhappy. I liked what I was doing. It was just starting to get a little bit anxious, a little bit antsy. About the same time, there was a church in a growing part of Florida that reached out to me about coming there to be their preacher. I've told you that story before. So to make a long story short, after several weeks of incredible opportunity, incredible place, incredible location, but for a variety of reasons, after a few weeks, I wound up, deciding to stay where I was. A few months after moving on from that opportunity, I was sitting in my office again one day, and the phone rang. And it was an elder or a board member from a church in Lexington, Kentucky. Now, if I told you the name of the church, some of you would know the church. It was a church that at one time, there were a lot of guys like me that would have walked to Lexington to have an opportunity to work at that church. They had just lost a ministry, had been there for 20-something years, and a little bit of upheaval, nothing too bad, but they were looking for somebody to come in and lead them into the future, and they wanted to know if I was interested. Now, to say I was interested would be an understatement. Here I was, 26 years old. I thought, this is awesome. Big church, big town, close to home, and they're interested. It took me about 10 seconds to tell the guy that I was interested. I thought about it and prayed about it for 9 seconds, and then I told him that I was interested. So we engaged in this process, and we went through several interviews, and you meet with all these different groups, and if you've ever been involved in something like that, you know how it goes. About 3 months into the process, the guy who was leading the search calls me again, and he says, I want you to meet me for lunch a couple days from then, and he named a really nice restaurant in Lexington. Now, they had told me earlier that they had started out with like 40 or 50 guys on this list, and they narrowed it down to me and one other guy, this older guy from Ohio. So when he called and he said, hey, I want you to meet me, and we're going to go to this really nice restaurant, I thought in my mind, boy, this is it. I mean, if he was going to tell me no, like we'd go to McDonald's, or Arby's or something, but we're going to a really nice place. This is going to be awesome. So I got in the car, I drive up there a couple of days later, and we make the small talk like you do, and then very graciously he told me they decided to go with the other guy. Now, you talk about, I went from here to, that kind of thing. And in my mind, boy, when I pulled in there, I'm thinking of guys I'm going to hire and houses I'm going to buy and all this, making the plan of how we're going to get this thing turned around. And so we talked a few minutes, and I understood their decision and why they made the decision they did. But I'm going to be honest, it still hurt. And the other guy was an Ohio State fan, which made it hurt just even worse. But I'm kind of kidding about that, but not really. So there I was, right back where I started. Wintertime sets in, sitting in the same office, snowing, cold, icy, refereeing almost every night, preaching a few weekends here and there. Birthday comes around, now I'm another year older, now I'm 27, and you start to wonder, is this what it's going to be? And you start to think, boy, if this is what it's going to be, it's not bad, but it's not great either. Is this what the rest of my life's going to look like? So to be honest, I didn't know the answer to that question, so I had a decision to make. I can either quit and go do something else because I'm frustrated, or I can just stay here and do the best I can where I am and just wait patiently for whatever comes next. And if nothing ever comes next, then that'll be okay too. So I made the decision, get through the winter. Snow starts to ease up a little bit. It's not quite as cold. I'm sitting there again one afternoon. I get another unexpected phone call from a guy named Van Phillips, who's an elder here at First Christian. Wanted to know if I might be interested in coming here. Now, I'll be honest, smaller church, smaller town, but there was something about it that grabbed me, so I came here. Now, that was 8 years ago. And I was thinking about this week. I look back over the last 8 years. Some of the best moments of my life have happened during the 8 years that I've been here. And just to wrap this story up, let me just tell you, I'm not going to go into all details, but let me just tell you, it's been a very good thing for me that I came here instead of there. And sometimes the here that you don't see is better than the there that God sees. It's a lot like what David said. I was young, now I'm a little bit older. And through all the ups and downs and all the twists and turns and all the things that you don't see, God somehow gets you where he wants you. And I hope that you can say the same thing. Could be for some of you, maybe you feel like you're stuck in the waiting room and you're unsure about how much longer you're going to have to wait or how much longer you can wait. And if that's you, I want to encourage you not to give up. Stay committed where you are. Do the best you can to love God and love people right where you are now. Don't waste the opportunities of today waiting for tomorrow to get here. Just be focused on today. Others of you, though, are here and you've heard all this talk about comebacks and setbacks, and for you, it feels like you're still stuck in the middle of a setback. And if that's your situation, I want you to know that, yes, you can have a comeback, but it won't be because your willpower, won't be because you're smart or better or, got more spirituality than anybody else. The only way to have a comeback is through Jesus. So just a moment, we're going to stand and we're going to sing a song. We call it an invitation song, and nothing magical about it. The idea is that if you need to pray with somebody, you want somebody to help you connect with Jesus or reconnect with Jesus or whatever it is you need to do, we've got people that are trained to do that. We've got people that would love to do that. They'd love to talk to you. They'd love to pray with you. But I want you to know you can have a comeback, but it will not be because of you. It'll only be because of Jesus. So I want you to stand, and if you're here and you need to pray with somebody, you just meet David or I on this front row, and we'll take our time talking with you.